Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, this time featuring the amazing Steve C de Baca. Steve is the Executive Vice President and Chief Patient Safety and Quality Officer at Philips since February 2023. He's got over 30 years of experience in quality and regulatory affairs in the MedTech sector. Before joining Philips, he held positions at many companies, including the world-famous Boston Scientific and Zimmer Biomet, where he played key roles in quality and regulatory affairs. So he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to this. Steve was an industry board member and instructor at St. Cloud University for their Regulatory Affairs Master's Degree Program. He holds an Engineering and Industrial Technology Bachelor's degree and an MBA from California State University, Long Beach. He resides in Minnesota with his wife, Catherine, and he has a son, Carsten, who I'm sure he's really proud of, who is attending Northeastern University. So Carsten, if you're listening, hello from me. In this episode, I talked to Steve about risk, and Steve shares about how taking risk, even as a regulatory professional, can really pay off when it comes to your career. Enjoy the episode, guys. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the MedTech industry. And today I'm really excited to have a legend of the MedTech industry, Steve de Baca, who is currently Chief Patient Safety and Quality Officer at Philips. Wow, Steve, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. And I don't know, I'm a legend in my own mind. The only place I'm a legend, but thank you.
So Steve, tell us a little bit who you are and what you do as Chief Patient Safety and Quality Officer for Philips.
Sure. So Steve C de Baca, it's a great title. I love it. But in layman's terms, I am responsible for the quality, regulatory, and clinical med team globally across Philips. So for all of the business units, all of the locations, et cetera. So I have kind of the quote womb to tomb of those three functions supporting the business.
So, Steve, I've been following your career over the years, and right now you hold obviously a very important position within Philips. Something that I really wanted to get into is, what made your journey different? So when you reflect on your career, what is it that you think helped you to get to the top level position of quality and regulatory for a company?
Well, I usually joke that I was too slow. Everybody else got, when they said volunteers one step forward, I was the only one who stood still, and everybody, stepped back. But no, I really equate my career to a couple things. One, luck and hard work, but really I equate it to the notion of embracing and taking risk. And I know that's a little strange coming from the head of quality and regulatory and clin med, because everybody believes that we're very binary. It's either good or bad. It's either compliant or non-compliant. But in reality, we live in huge levels and gradations of gray. And it's all around risk. And so I'm a believer in embracing risk, going towards it. And I equate risk to kind of like an explosion. And if you run towards it, yes, there's still the explosion, but you can run towards the source. You understand where the explosion is coming from. Two, you minimize the damage. If you run away from risk, what happens is that energy level, that momentum, that quote damage just gets wider spread. And so I'm a believer in running towards it risk as my function. In my career, I've also ran towards risk because that's how I learned and grew and really just got the opportunity to try different things. And as I tried different things, I added it to my toolbox, added it to my experiences, and I added it to me. And so each one of those risk-taking adventures allowed me to go to the next level and the next level and the next opportunity. And so I've been fortunate that I've embraced risk, I've taken risk. I've got singed a couple times. Don't hear me. Not everything was perfect, but it made me stronger, more effective. It made me, more perspective. It made me appreciate more and understand more. And so I believe in embracing risk and taking risk.
So Steve, I think that's really interesting as well as a concept, because as you say, naturally in quality and regulatory, it's not something that I hear about often, you know. So it's quite a fresh perspective. But have you got some concrete examples of risks that you've taken that have really paid off when you reflect?
Yeah. So there's a couple of points in my career. So the first was going into quality. So when I came out of school, I was an engineer, predominantly mechanical, industrial engineer, et cetera. And I worked in aerospace. And at the first few months, I was a drawing checker. And so imagine you walk in the morning, there'd be stacks of drawings you go through to make sure they were correct, geometrical design and tolerancing. And so you'd go through these layers. If there was an issue, you'd have to go to an old engineer, some guy in his 30s or 40s. You know, again, I just started my career. And you'd ask him a lot of questions, you'd figure it out. And then the next day, same thing, whole lot of drawings. And I after about 3 months of that, I was like, oh man, I picked the wrong career. I'm not too sure what's going on. I'm gonna have to call my parents and tell them I wasted all this money in college, et cetera. And somebody had introduced the concept of quality engineering, really at this time, aerospace, working with the suppliers.
Okay.
And somebody recommended that I'd be good for it. Why, I don't know, but I did. And it really changed my career. Not just it led me to where I am today, but it gave me perspective. Quality is one of the few organizations, whether you're in aerospace, whether you're in MedTech, whatever industry, it's one of the few organizations where you're a hub. Everything comes and goes through you, whether you're at the front end in product development, the back end with customer sales and service, or especially in the middle with supply chain, commercialization, manufacturing. And so I just fell in love with it because it was one where I could see a lot of different pictures, be engaged with a lot of different activities, and touch and feel a lot of things. And so that was a big risk because again, it wasn't, you know, your classic engineering. It wasn't behind the drawing board engineering, but I enjoyed it and took that opportunity. And then the next one for me was moving from aerospace to medtech. You know, again, at the time, if you were an engineer in Southern California where I went to school, you went to aerospace. That's where all the cool technology was. That's where, I mean, you went into space. I mean, you can't get any more, you know, engineering than that. And I was exploring and going to a small medtech company, and they made diagnostics. In fact, their biggest selling product was a pregnancy tester. And people were going, "You're going to leave this to pregnancy testers?" And I took it as a risk, and I really said to myself, maybe I want to go from quote hurting people, you know, aerospace and military, to doing some good. Even though it may just be a pregnancy tester, it's still doing good.
Yeah.
And I never looked back, and I've not looked back, and I've had no reason to look back. I've been over 30 years, scarily so, in medtech and in various, you know, levels and industries. And it's amazing the technology that you have. Yeah, we may not go to space, but the technology we create is amazing technology. And here at Philips, even more so when you look at the technology we do. So that was a big risk because I was going away from quote engineering, or what people considered, you know, the high level of engineering. I also at that time, or a few years later, did a startup. Now, yes, part of that was the little capitalist in me wanted to go, you know, quote, get rich. But for me, the real risk and adventure of a startup was doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
At a startup, you wear a lot of hats. You have to. And this startup was a implantable startup. So up to that point in my career, I'd done class 1, class 2, lower level, you know, products, and this was an implantable. And so this overnight, I was going to have to learn, grow, you know, 5 times, 10 times what I'd done at this point. And I just immersed myself into it. And I got a chance to do a lot of different things. I was doing quality, I was doing regulatory, I was doing operations, I was doing the janitorial services. Because at a startup, you really have to like go all in, and you have to do a lot of different things. And in that 2-year period, I advanced my career probably 10 years.
Yeah.
And that wasn't necessarily the plan, but it was a great outcome. And it took risk, it took a change to be open to do that. You know, go from a company where it was established, I was growing in my career, to a company that literally could fall apart overnight.
Yeah.
And that was the risk, and I really enjoyed it because of the learning opportunities.
Yeah.
The next big quote risk in my career, and I call it the Godfather moment. So I had been at Boston Scientific for about a year. I was a director of design assurance, so quality at the front end, product
Yeah.
development. And we had a few months earlier had received what we called a corporate warning letter. So the FDA issued the first and only corporate warning letter, and it basically, was a signal that Boston Scientific, your sites, not your individual site, but multiple sites, are so quote bad. We're going to give you this one warning letter that covers your whole corporation, as
Wow.
opposed to giving warning letters for each of the sites and multiplying it. Basically, the FDA came and said, congratulations, here's a corporate warning letter that covers Boston Scientific, all entities, all sites, all things. And I was at our Maple Grove facility, which was the center of our cardiovascular, which was and still is the biggest part of the business. And I got this, what I call Godfather moment. So my boss at the time was kind of a no nonsense, not a whole lot of patient guy. He calls me at 7 o'clock in the morning. He says, Steve, I need you in my office at 5. And so you can imagine the whole day I am running around going, okay, what did I do wrong? What happened? As I can think, because I'm like, no, it can't be that. No, you can't be mad about that. And I went on and on and on and on. And trust me, that wasn't a very productive day. But so about 5 o'clock, I sheepishly, go around the corner and knock on the door. And he was a big baseball fan at the time. His favorite team, the St. Louis Cardinals, were in the World Series, and they were getting ready to win. They were at the doorstep, and he was in. I was asking how about the game, et cetera, and because you don't want to blurt out, why in the hell am I here at 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
Why'd you the whole day? And we were talking about the game, and he got really in good spirits. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? All of a sudden, the phone rings, and he puts it on Polygon, and it was his boss, who was the head of quality and regulatory compliance for Boston Scientific. And outside of the lack of the Italian, accents, I got the Godfather moment that was something like, Steve, we have an offer you can't refuse. And the offer was to lead the cardiovascular effort to clear the corporate warning letter. And in the corporate warning letter, cardiovascular was at the front and center of a lot of activities. And at the time, I instantaneously, with no hesitation, with no doubt, with not a single thought to negotiate, said yes. And I said yes for 2 reasons. One, the situation demanded that we needed to do something different. And for us to turn the business around, we needed something different. But what really got me excited was somebody else saw something in me to take the chance on me. And so they were going to take a chance on me in this role, then why wouldn't I take that risk in general? I've learned next time, stop, get a better negotiations, even get a better deal out of it before you just instantaneously jump into the fire. But that was an example where the situation dictated taking risk. And if somebody is willing to take the risk on you, why don't you take the risk on yourself? And that really was that Godfather moment. I think the last one, and probably the most recent, but arguably the greatest risk I've taken, is joining Philips.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a risk. When you look at the history of Philips, the compliance of Philips, the scale, the scope, where we are, et cetera. But I look at less as risk and more as opportunity. And that's not just trying to be Pollyannic. Ooh, let's kind of turn it around so it sounds better than it is. No, every risk is an opportunity. Just as much as when you get a corporate warning letter, you have to almost act with a sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. I would argue it's the same effort to act with a sense of opportunity as it does with a sense of urgency. And that's the same with risk. And so when I look at Philips, the risk is tremendous. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It is Mount Everest of compliance risk. But I look at that opportunity of what a view when we get to the top. And that's not because I'm foolish or foolhardy. It's just that risk is just an opportunity to do something meaningful, to do something different, to be a difference maker. To, yes, have days that you really question yourself, is it really worth the risk? But then you remind yourself that no risk, no reward.
That's it.
No risk, no opportunity. No risk, no learning or growing. And so that's how I kind of look at it. And so, yes, I operate supposedly in a world of black and white and risk is well defined, et cetera. It's not. And so because it's not, go embrace it. Go search it out. Go take on risk.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to unpack there, Steve. So I don't even know where to start. But you've given some real concrete examples of how that pivotal moment of like yes or no, run towards it or run away from it, and running towards it, how that's actually played out to help you. I want to go to the startup example that you've given, just because a lot of people I know listening, and they ask me a lot about the difference between sort of like working in a startup versus working in an established company. And I totally identify with the wearing multiple hats. When I started Elemed at the beginning, it was like my title was sort of CEO / recruiter / marketing executive / finance controller. But it is very much, you do have to just jump in and just get stuff done, right? But for you, as someone who's worked in some of these big global corporates in MedTech versus a startup, how do you compare and contrast the differences?
A couple of things. I think the first one is how you've alighted, is that you have to kind of dip your toe in a lot of different areas. And it's a lot of times outside of what you've done or what you're comfortable doing. To your point, I had to go into areas, like budgeting, finance, that I didn't necessarily have to go in. I went into at the time, and it was a great learning curve, but I was not good at it. A lot of presentations and dog and pony shows. When you're doing startups, you're trying to really every day it's get more money so you can last another day. And so there was a lot of conversations with bankers and VC and things of this nature. And so you had to get good at quote telling a story. And so that wasn't a natural comfort for me at the beginning, but you had no other choice. So you kind of had to jump in the deep end. And so I think it's that first one is really dipping your toe into areas that you're not necessarily trained at or qualified at or doing. And for me, that was great. No better way to do than to do. No better way to learn than learning. And so that was great. I also think that sometimes the difference between a startup and a bigger company, scope and scale. The activities are very similar, but at a startup, literally it may be a 5-10 person room, not a building, a room, or a handful of rooms. Whereas you get to a big company, a Boston Scientific or Philips or some of the other companies I worked at, all of a sudden now you have 40 sites. You have 70,000+ people that you're responsible for. But when you really get to the base fundamental activities, they're very much the same. But you have to understand the scope and scale. And where that risk comes in is how can you clearly communicate, clearly articulate what you're trying to do such that 70,000 people, like at Philips, can understand, can say, now we know where we're going and why Steve's taking us there. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference. And that's a risk because all of a sudden now you have to open yourself up wider. When you're at a small startup, it's very easy to get an intimate connection, on a one-to-one hallway, how you doing, things of this nature. But when you have to reach 70,000 people, you have to create that intimacy at a wider scale and scope. But it doesn't mean you don't create that intimacy. And so I think that's the real shift is you have to kind of open up your field of view and take the risk of opening up yourself to that field of view. You have to go beyond just the one-to-one intimacy to the one-to-many intimacies. And so that's usually the biggest shift that you have to make.
How do you go about creating that connection when you are operating at such a large scale?
Oh, I think a couple of things. One, be authentic. People will see, if you're faking it, if you're not authentic, if you're not true to yourself. Two, make sure that you are repetitious, a constant theme, because you never know when you come into contact with people, whether it's a video, whether it's an email, whether it's in the hallway. And so the more that you are authentic, but repetition in terms of what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, then it starts to stick. The last thing is flexibility. You don't know when you're going to come across somebody. Now, some things you do very active. I go and visit sites. I was at our Pittsburgh site earlier this week, working with individuals, teams, and groups. And so you force some of the activity, but you never know when the activity comes and when the connections come. So I'll always be prepared for that. And so you have to kind of have that. So be authentic, be repetitious in terms of who you are, where you're going, what you're trying to do, and then just be flexible because those connection points happen instantaneously and you got to be prepared for them.
Yeah. And put yourself out there, obviously, as part of what you're saying. Be visible.
Take the risk. Take the risk. Take the risk to let people in and to let yourself out.
So I've got a question for you. So what advice would you give to someone who is afraid to take risks? Because I think it's great that you're sort of talking about all these examples that you've taken, but what about someone who's sitting there thinking, I'd love to take a risk, but I've got a family, I've got a house to pay for. Should I take that risk and go and work for that startup company that, as you said, maybe maybe they're going to run out of cash. You know,
Yeah.
should I take this new job that I have no experience doing? What advice would you have for people like who are thinking that?
So a couple of things. First of all, that concern or the apprehension is natural. That's not making you weak. That doesn't mean that you're not too sure or you can't do it. It's a natural act. In fact, you'd be almost foolish not to have that natural act. Every one of these opportunities I highlighted for you, there was the butterflies, there was the unknown, the oh my God, are we sure? I'm not, and you would look at it from multiple levels: personal, family oriented, professional. Is this right for me? And all those things in between. And so the first thing I tell people is your reaction and the concern and the apprehension is natural. Don't fight it. Understand it. Then what you need to do is then seek input. What I try to do every time I get these decisions, and the exception with that Boston Scientific, just because it was so exciting that I didn't think. And as I said, now I've gotten better at negotiating. Seek input from multiple levels. I always tell people seek input from a personal level. Where are you with in your personal life? Is this the right time? Is this the right environment? Am I in the right state of mind? And same thing professionally. But go seek input. Go understand why others believe in you or seeing you in this opportunity. Because very rarely do you get the out of the blue, go take a chance. Somebody saw something in you, or somebody sees the potential in you. Whether it's a new role, a new job, moving from X to Y. Somebody else saw something in you. Go ask why. Because there's something that you're not seeing in yourself that's causing you to limit yourself. The more that you can understand what others see in you, your ability, your energy, your just happen to be in front of me, kind of thing. But understand that. And then once you get past that, so once you make that decision, go all in. The worst thing I've seen when people take risks is they kind of have one foot over here and one foot over here. They want to try to play it safe on both sides. Once you take that quote risk, go all in towards it. Because if not, what happens is you'll always hold yourself back. But yes, it's natural to be kind of concerned. Go seek some input. Go really ask the questions. Go of yourself first and foremost. Can I do it? Am I in the right state of mind, etc. Go seek the input of others. Specifically, why do you believe I can do this? What have I done or haven't done that allows you to feel comfortable putting me in this role or suggesting I take on this role? And then once you make that decision, whether it's staying where you are or going forward, go all in, etc. The last piece of advice I'd give you is, because you don't take the risk today, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take the risk tomorrow. Sometimes people believe in careers, if you don't do this, you're at one and done, then you're done. And in reality, life is dynamic. So again, you may not take this opportunity. That doesn't mean there's not another opportunity. You just need to be prepared for each and every opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's really important to your point about really understanding what is it, especially if somebody's offering something to you, right? What is it? And that's part of sort of understanding your almost like your USP, what makes you different and what makes you stand out.
Yeah.
And something that I see very often is more and more as you advance through your career, it becomes less and less like the technical skills that you have, right? But more the people skills.
Absolutely. It's funny, and it's exactly that. You hit the nail on the head. I'm in my role not because I'm the quote best at managing an audit, or the best at doing a CAPA, or the best at doing a 510K submission. I'm in my role because of my experience, my background of being an active, engaged business partner who happens to be a technical, functional domain expert. And so those skills are almost the ante, but the differences and the differentiation is what I can do with those skills, not because I have the skills. And so I think as you grow in your career, you then have to take on risk of, I have to broaden my skills, which means I have to broaden what else I bring to the equation. My work ethic, my integrity, my relationship, my willingness to partner, to almost get out of my own comfort zone of being a good CAPA manager or being a good 510K manager, to being a good business partner, to being a good leader. And so, yeah, you're right. That's a big shift in risk, is that we go from those that we get recognized as for our technical skills to more our functional skills to ultimately to our personal leadership skills. And so you have to kind of evolve by taking risk to go into that area. But you are 100% correct. I have not done a CAPA in a long time, thank God. But I still have understanding of what a CAPA needs to be, how it needs to highlight, how it fits the overall business picture. But if I didn't evolve, if I didn't take those risks, I'd still be doing CAPAs.
Mm, mm. And so let's flip it to the other side, because you said, you know, you've run towards the explosion, you've run towards the fire a few times, and sometimes you've got singed. So
Oh yeah.
I'm interested to know a little bit, you know, what's been some of the biggest mistakes you've made when it's come to taking risks?
Yeah, usually the first, not understanding the potential implications of the risk.
Okay.
You know, sometimes, you know, we look at risk. Oh, okay, it's a risk. No big deal. Let's move on. No, you have to understand the levels of the risk. What potential implications? What could go wrong? You know, kind of things. And so you have to do that so that you're prepared for it. Not because you're fait accompli to do that, but you better see the signals of those things. So then you go, ooh, okay, we're heading down a path that this could go real bad. So I better figure out how to, you know, turn around or take a left instead of a right kind of principle. So I think you have to go in there really eyes wide open. Taking risk doesn't mean you're foolish or foolhardy. It just means you have an understanding of the risk in front of you. As you're running towards it, you have to understand, okay, what could happen? What are the levels of bad that could go wrong? You know, and so you have to have that so that, one, you appreciate and see the signals, but two, you're almost countermeasuring on the fly. And so you have to have that. The second thing about risk is going in apprehensive and slow.
Okay.
As I highlight, remember that explosion? Your best bet is go in fast and furious. Understand, go in. Risk does not decrease with age. It only increases. And so the more that you run towards it in a very focused, fast forward movement, the better. And so the areas where I've gotten singed or had, more troubles is when I was going slower than I could have and should have, or I was not sure and I wanted to be a little bit more, let's be a little bit more cautious on this one. Again, not foolhardy or foolish, but they don't age well. Risk does not age well. And so the sooner you address it. Now, you may not necessarily solve it all at one time, but you solve a portion of it, and that diminishes it on its own. And so you have to move fast. The last thing I always say with taking on risk, failing is not a failure. Many times when you're taking on risk, you're taking on unknowns, uncertainty. And so you don't necessarily have the answer. It wouldn't be risk if you had the answer.
Yeah.
And so you are many times battling risk and in some cases failing, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. All you're doing is, okay, that didn't work. What about this? Okay, now that seems to work a little bit better. Now, how about this? Whereas sometimes when you take risk and you fail, people think, oh, I'm a failure. I tried. I just can't get it done. No, sometimes taking a risk is just a series of failings until you succeed.
Yeah.
And that's the key because, again, risk is unknown and uncertainty. That means you don't have the answer. But failing is not failure. And so that's those three pieces of advice I would give in terms of, and trust me, the gray hairs show that I have done many.
So, but Steve, can you give me like a concrete story though? So like it went for one, when you're talking about speed and
Yep.
being too slow, like what does it actually look like?
Sure. So again, it's very common. When companies get into kind of 483s, warning letters, things of this nature, it's very common. The first thing they'll want to do is over-assess.
Mm-hmm.
Something's broke, bring in a bunch of consultants, bunch of inspectors, a bunch of auditors, and go inspect everything, right? And they'll sit there and they'll wait. And what they're waiting for is the full picture. Well, in many cases, you already know that you have a failing process. You wouldn't get the 43, you wouldn't get the warning letter if something wasn't broken. Waiting to understand the totality of what's broken means you're not fixing what you know is broken. And so I see a lot of companies where they'll want to wait to get the full picture. And in reality, you've already got enough of a picture to get things going. So don't wait until you have the full picture because you won't get the full picture until you really start fixing the little pictures and the little pictures and the little pictures, et cetera. And so that's an example where I see. And then what happens is you lose time. You'll do that 6 months to 9 months of assessment. You'll want to get everything on the table, and you'll convince yourself, if I get everything on the table, I can have a full, complete plan. We can make sure that we understand everything. Well, you already know enough to get started. So why are you waiting?
Yeah.
And so that's an example. And trust me, I made that example. I did that one. The first time I got into 483, I was like, okay, let's really inspect everything, et cetera. And we did these things, et cetera. Yes, did I get more information? Absolutely. Did I get more clarity? Absolutely. Did I solve the problem that was really, there at day one? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in reality, the problem was right in front of me. And in fact, it got bigger because all of a sudden people start saying, well, is Steve paying attention? Is he ignoring it? Is this really that big of a problem, et cetera? Because they were seeing me being apprehensive. They were seeing me kind of being, quote, cautious. And the problem was staring me in the face. I was thinking in my head, well, I got to understand the big problem, the whole entire problem. There was already a problem in front of me. Why was I waiting and not addressing it? And so that's an example that it's very common. And a lot of that's just driven by fear.
Yeah.
You don't know what else is out there. Well, you know what you know. Go solve what you know, because that'll then educate you and empower you to go learn those other things. Because those other things are still out there. Yeah. But why do you want to understand everything when in reality you already know something?
Yeah. And it's this thing of done is better than perfect, right? And
exactly.
Perfect impedes progress ultimately.
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as perfect.
So true.
but that's the thing. And again, the other thing that 10 companies in these situations, they don't want to do more wrong, so they do nothing.
Yeah.
And it's because you get just so analysis paralysis. You almost want to, you don't want to break anything because it's broken. And I always go, it's already broken. What are you really going to break?
Yeah.
And it's you got to get through that mind shift. And that's where that embracing risk really helps you, because the risk is, I'm going to break something more. And the opportunity is, you may fix something that you don't know. And so you've got to be able to transverse that. And I joke that the greatest distance you have to transverse is the 6 inches between your ears. It's really you limiting you. And so the more that you can unleash yourself, have confidence in yourself, and really take the risk on yourself, the better.
Yeah. How do you measure the success? How do you of a risk? So let's say you're presented with an opportunity, or you take a decision. Yeah, I'm going to go for it. How do you measure how successful it's been?
Well, I think a couple things. I think you could take the obvious of the impact. Did you convert bad to good? Did you eliminate a 483 warning letter? I mean, did you improve this KPI from X to Y? I mean, there's the tangibility, the obviousness, etc. But the real measures to me are the learnings and experiences. Yes, you always harken back, and yes, you put on your resume, I improved this, I cleared this, etc. But the real benefit, the real accomplishments is what did I learn and what did I experience? And then equally important, what did I teach and what did I allow others to experience? And so that's how I measure myself. The results are there. They're almost a byproduct. But if I'm not learning experience, and if I'm not engaging others to learn and experience, I'm not going to get those KPIs. And so we tend to over-index the obvious KPIs, but it's really the learnings and experiences that are the difference makers.
So when you have a risk presented in front of you, talk me through literally what your sort of process is or your formula to decide, okay, yes, I'm going to go for it, or no, I'm not.
I usually do kind of three things. First, I always understand the implications of the risk. I start with patient safety first. I start with patient safety. So I do patient safety risk. What is the harm, the potential harm, the impact to the patient? Then I go quickly into product performance. What's the implications to the product performance, how it can be used, misused, etc. Then I go into compliance, and then I end with business. And the reason I do that is, for me to understand the business risk, you got to understand those first three risks. But if I'm not asking the business risk, then I'm not being a really good business partner. So you have to look at it all angles and really understand that. Two is, I then look at risk as, if I do nothing, what would happen? Because sometimes we will assume risk is catastrophic. In some cases, it's not. In some cases, it's not necessarily, do I have to do anything, in a sense. I don't have to go all in. it's levels of risk. Once you get those kind of things, you understand it. But you say, okay, if I do nothing, what would happen? If I do something, what would happen? Or what would you want to happen, etc. And then the third thing I try to do is understand, okay, do I have the wherewithal, or can I get the wherewithal to solve this risk? And it's not, I guarantee that I can solve the risk, but do I have the necessary ammunition? Me personally, my team, whatever it is. And if I don't, well, then what do I need to do that? Because again, while you're running to risk, you better be well armed and ready to run to risk. Again, it's not a foolish activity. It's a planful, thoughtful activity. And so you have to be prepared for the risk. Understand, the levels of it, understand what you would do or not do, or would it change it? And then what do you need to be as armed as you can be given the unknown? And so I always look at it that way. And so that's how I kind of approach it. Again, not because you know everything. In fact, you know very little usually, but do you know enough to be prepared enough? And that's really the key. And then the rest is dodging, weaving, ups, downs, and just being adaptable and flexible.
How does that change when it's a risk regarding your career?
Quite honestly, I take on more, and simply because I control that career. Now, there are elements that others control, my boss, the companies, etc. But for the most part, I control my career. I control what I put into it, and I hopefully can control what I get out of it. But because of that, because it's me and my career, I'm willing to take on more risk. I'm willing to do more difference. And I've been fortunate because every time I've done that, not because I've been successful every time, but every time I've done that, I've been successful in learning and experiencing, gaining more knowledge, doing more that I would have done. And that just made me a better person, leader, partner. And so because of that, and because I can control that, I'm willing to take on more risk. Where I take on less risk is with my team, with the company. That doesn't mean I still won't take, those uncertain dynamics, but I'll take more risk with me than I will with others. And because again, I can control me, I hope to influence others.
Have you ever been really let down by someone who you've sort of given them an opportunity, sort of hoping that they'll move forwards and take that risk, but actually they haven't?
Yeah. And in those cases, usually what I try to do is get to that next layer of what's preventing you, what's concerning you, etc. from the standpoint. And usually what you find is it's usually a lack of knowledge. So how do I help become more knowledge? A lack of understanding, which is different from knowledge, understanding the situation, the context, etc. Or just not the right time. And when I see something, I say, man, Elena, this would be great for you. I think you could do really well. And your apprehension. So I always go through that level. Okay, how do I help you become more knowledgeable about it? How do I help give you more understanding? And then reverse roles. How do I understand your situation that could prevent you? And you may come back and say, Steve, it's not the right time. And I'm going to say, fair. Because you don't want to force somebody into a situation where they're not ready or comfortable or confident. And so again, you have to understand that. That's where, again, when anybody who hasn't taken on that potential, I always remind them, that doesn't mean you're one and done. I still see something in you. I just got to help you get to see it in yourself. And then I double down on how to help you see that, so that when the next opportunity comes, you're more ready, you're more prepared, you're more willing to do that. But again, you have to kind of make sure that you are very empathetic and sympathetic at the same time, and understanding that not everybody is ready today. That doesn't mean they can't be ready tomorrow.
But also, I really see value in asking that question of like, what's stopping you? Because I can't even tell you how many times I've maybe approached somebody about a role, right? And I'll get a no, and then it's like, okay, what's stopping you going forwards? If it, I know this aligns to what you told me you're looking for. What's stopping you? And as you said, either there's like not enough information, there's a misconception, and some people just they need to sort of get the no out of the way, right? But then if you ask a follow-up question that sort of challenges them to actually think about it again,
Agreed.
will actually find that actually they will say, okay, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'll give it a shot. Maybe let's try. And I can't even tell you how many times I've made some really good matches in terms of placements with the people that initially said no to me when I first approached them. So there's so much power in just asking that follow-up question.
Exactly. Yeah. And the last thing I always leave is, I'm asking you to take risk, but not on your own. I still have a role to play, coaching, mentoring, guiding, things of this nature. So it's not throwing you in the deep end without water picks. And it's that kind of mentality. But yes, you are correct. Breaking down the apprehension, not because it's not real. As I said earlier, it's a natural to have the apprehension, but what's causing apprehension? And then can you get through that? And it's not a force to get through that. It's a process to get through that. So, but asking the follow-on questions is amazing, because all of a sudden, somebody will get a pause and they'll go, yeah, I can do that. Why am I myself?
Exactly. So what would you say are some of the biggest rewards then that you've been able to reap from taking risks in your career?
Well, I mean, as you highlighted earlier, the career growth. Each level, I took risk in each level. I was able to build on that risk via learnings, experiences, and applying it. I think the biggest reward for me, to be honest, is just everything I've learned and experienced, everything I've done. I mean, they have made me. They have allowed me to grow, etc. And so the biggest reward to that, again, yes, I can point to, we did this and we accomplished that and we cleared this. And those are great, but that's not what I look at as quote the accomplishments. It's what did I learn and gain? What did I do and experience? How did I make a difference? That's how I do it. I mean, so I've been fortunate in my career to have been, either taking on risk or given risk or just fell into risk. But each time I was able to learn and grow from those risks. Not because everyone was successful, not because every day was successful, but over time, it allowed me to be successful. It allowed me to grow. So those are how I measure myself and how I literally look back to look forward.
Any big regrets?
Many cases not going fast enough and doing enough. I in a lot of cases I look back going, I had an opportunity there. Why didn't I take it? Or there was an opportunity that, why didn't I chase it? It's usually those kind of things, etc. I've had many, and I'm blessed, but there was a lot I missed too. And so again, when I look back, there was some that I truly missed and didn't see. And so I would have, if I could go backwards, I'd love to have taken on some more that I missed, because again, I could have grown even faster, better, so stronger.
Yeah. It's always the opportunities we don't take though, right?
Or don't see. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So final question, Steve, the big one. What's the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
Twofold. To leave it better than I got it, and to leave it in better hands. I'm a big believer that you can make a difference. Start making a difference. And the biggest difference you can make is in other people's lives. And so how do you leave it in better hands? And so I've been fortunate through my career to not only, quote, leave it better than I got it, but leave it in hands that were better than me.
Really powerful, really powerful. It's been absolutely fascinating learning about your story and this concept of taking risk. I'm super inspired. I hope our listeners are super inspired. Thank you for coming on the show, Steve.
Thank you again, Elena. This has been amazing. And again, anytime, any place, you count me in. I look forward to it.
To all of our listeners, don't forget to comment, give this a thumbs up, connect and follow Steve C de Baca on LinkedIn. Follow Elemed, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks for another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed. Thank you and goodbye.